I'm very excited to be talking with you today about guided oral reading. And I borrowed from Dr. Lee's presentation yesterday. She talked about the link between reading and this image of a mother bird with the young birds. And so I borrowed that idea, and this is the image that I came up with for guided oral reading. So I'll talk to you about the National Reading Panel in the United States and the guidelines specifically in the area of guided oral reading and fluency. So your first question is probably, what is the National Reading Panel? And as you might imagine, if you know many Americans, they have lots of opinions. And that is very true when it comes to reading. So the National Reading Panel was a group put together in 1997 to really look at reading and come up with guidelines around what reading is all about. So 14 people were chosen, and they had a variety of different backgrounds, different perspectives, and they spent 2 years looking at the research knowledge base around reading and the efficacy of the things that were being applied for reading. And so after 2 years, they came out with a report, and they had actually 2 reports and a video that they put together. They titled it Teaching Children to Read. And in many ways, this has put to rest much of the argument around reading, because now everyone has a guideline to follow for instruction. The 5 pillars, which you've seen several times today, more or less looked like these: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And I write them up here this way just to give you that image, because this is kind of a prevailing image. We saw it with arrows, but this is the mindset that many people are in, and this is the thinking. But for today, I want you to think of a slightly different image when you think of these 5 skills. The image I'd like you to have is that of a bridge, or perhaps you're more familiar with this bridge. And on one side, you have phonemic awareness and phonics. And on the other side, the end goal, the land that you want to get to, is comprehension. And fluency, really, if you think in your mind's eye, is the bridge between these two things. So when we talk about reading fluency, we're talking about skills that are critical for comprehension. We want children to be able to read out loud with accuracy, speed, and good expression so that they can comprehend and then remember the material. That's really what fluency is all about. If they are not reading with fluency and they're having difficulty, they're going to have difficulty understanding what they're reading. The recommendation from the National Reading Panel for reading fluency is fairly straightforward. Just like the gray matter, I'm always changing in response to my environment. So the National Reading Panel is very straightforward in their guidelines. Do you know what you need to do to be better at reading fluently? It's read. You need to read. So students, to become more fluent, we need to get them reading aloud, reading with a helper, and reading the same text several times, repeated reading. So it makes sense, and intuitively it works, but sometimes this can be difficult to do in a scalable way. We struggle a lot with this in the United States, making sure that all children are reading out loud with help and reading repeatedly. Now, the National Reading Panel, when they released their report, they did a press release, and there were several specific things that they stated within that I just want to run through. Effective reading includes teaching children to break apart words, that phonemic awareness. Also, teaching students that these sounds are represented by letters and they can be blended together to make words, phonics. That this practice of reading aloud with guidance and feedback is important. and that strategies should be taught to help guide comprehension, thinking strategies. The National Institute for Literacy also has a definition for fluency, and that is, it refers to the ability to read connected text aloud, so texts that have context, with accuracy, speed, and appropriate phrasing. Of course, other people have other opinions, but these are some that I liked. So this is my favorite, the ability to read with enough ease and accuracy so you can focus your attention on the meaning and the message. To me, this is really the bridge. If one part of the bridge is broken, you can't get across. If the bridge is closed, you can't get across. Everything has to be working well along that bridge. It has to be easy and accurate as you read in order to get where you're going. Now, this picture comes from Boston, which is where I live. Harvard Medical and Beth Israel Hospital put this together. And what you're looking at are just two different brains. The one on the top is fluent. The one on the bottom is not. If you imagine that these are roads that you drive on, you can imagine that it would take you a lot longer to drive on the roads down here and get from one place to another than these roads. And so that's what that ease is all about, making things faster and automatic so that it's less time-consuming to work through the text. Now, what did they conclude about reading fluency as far as ways to instruct it? The reading practice is generally believed to improve reading fluency. I bet they were very surprised when they discovered that. There are two instructional approaches that are used for reading fluency. One is guided, repeated oral reading. The other is independent silent reading. When they looked at these two approaches, they discovered things. The guided oral reading has a significant and positive impact for students of all ages in areas like word recognition, reading fluency, and comprehension. Silent reading, the panel was unable to conclude that it had any improvement as an instructional strategy alone. We looked at this slide just now. Do you remember? And it's from 5th grade students. It looks at how well they're doing in reading and how much time they spend reading outside of school. And then it estimates on that data how many words they read each year. And words are important as we learn because that is vocabulary, that is topic knowledge, that is the essence of learning. Now, these are students in the U.S. I'm sure Korean students read much more. But everyone can read more, yes? So if we add more time, you see greater word exposure, dramatically greater. More definitions. So oral reading, not silent reading, is one of the most important methods to teach fluency. And the ability to bring language rhythm to text and appropriate phrasing is a very important component to reading fluency. I imagine learning English, this is also a very important component to be able to have proper phrasing, and that's the magic. When you have these pieces working together in such a way that the phrasing is natural, that's when the reading becomes beautiful and magical. This is a very long piece of text, so I've broken it up. What they are saying is that as you read and practice and become more fluent and become better, your word recognition becomes automatic. So the oral reading skill builds the comprehension skill. That follows the oral reading skill. But when your oral reading skill is poor and word recognition is not automatic, you have poor comprehension, And your poor reading skill is really because your cognitive resources are being spent on word analysis instead of being spent on comprehension. So, what is the goal? The goal is not to have students always reading out loud, but it's to have students who read very well silently. We want them to be able to devote their attention to sentences, to paragraphs, to longer parts of text. In order to do this, to get all of that volume of reading, they have to be fluent readers. The hesitations that interrupt take away from what the author intended. An engineer who designs a bridge is not going to design holes for cars to fall through. You want the smooth experience. So the fluent reading requires that automatic ability, that automaticity. And the researchers have found that there's a very high correlation between this skill, this ability of reading easily, fluently, and comprehension, what you understand. So the correlation is over 85% between these skills. This chart comes from Florida. And in Florida, they rank the students on their standard test by ability. 1 are the poor performers, and 5 are the highest performers. And of course, the goal is to have the students good at verbal knowledge and reasoning or comprehension. And what